Every night, he woke up in a different body. The first time it happened, Elias Thorne woke up staring at a ceiling he didn't know. The texture was rough, like old plaster, and a single bare bulb hung precariously overhead. He tried to sit up, but his hands were not his own. They were smaller, softer, with carefully painted nails. Panic flared in his chest. He looked down. The body he was in was slender, female, and wearing a floral nightgown. Elias was a man, 32 years old, with calloused hands and a sturdy build. This was wrong, terribly wrong. He scrambled out of the unfamiliar bed, his movements clumsy in this alien form. He rushed to the nearest mirror, a small, heart-shaped one hanging on the wall. The face that stared back was young, with wide, startled blue eyes and a cascade of blonde hair. He didn't recognize it. This wasn't him. Disorientation warred with a rising tide of terror. He had gone to sleep in his own bed, in his own body, in his own small apartment. How had this happened? Was he dreaming? He pinched his arm, the soft skin yielding under his touch. It felt real, too real. He spent the rest of the night in a state of bewildered panic, exploring the small, unfamiliar room, trying to piece together where he was and whose life he had somehow stumbled into. The room contained feminine belongings, makeup scattered on a dresser, delicate jewelry on a bedside table, books with titles he didn't recognize. There was no clue as to how he had gotten there or why he was in this body. As dawn broke, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He lay back down on the strange bed, his mind racing, and drifted into a fitful sleep. When he woke again, the ceiling was different. It was smooth, white, with recessed lighting. He sat up, his hands large and familiar, calloused and strong. He looked down. He was back in his own body, wearing his own worn t-shirt. Relief washed over him, so intense it almost made him weep. It had been a nightmare, a terrifyingly real nightmare. He tried to shake it off, to start his day, but the memory of the blonde girl's face, the feel of her slender body, lingered with unsettling clarity. It had felt too real to be just a dream. That night, Elias went to sleep with a sense of unease. He tossed and turned, the memory of the previous night's terror still vivid. When he finally drifted off, it was into a restless slumber. He woke up staring at a ceiling made of dark wood planks. The air smelled of sawdust and oil. He sat up, his hands small and nimble, covered in grease. He looked down at a small, wiry body clad in overalls. He was in the body of a young boy, maybe 10 years old. Panic returned, sharp and suffocating. This continued night after night. Elias would fall asleep in his own body and wake up in someone else's. He experienced life as an elderly woman with aching joints, a busy chef in a bustling kitchen, a sleeping dog curled in a basket. Each morning, the terror and confusion would be replaced by a wave of relief as he woke up back in his own bed, in his own body. The transitions were seamless. One moment he was himself, the next he was someone else, experiencing their life, their senses, their immediate surroundings. There was no memory of how he got there, no sense of control. He was simply there. The lives he inhabited were varied and often mundane. He experienced the quiet solitude of a lighthouse keeper, the frantic energy of a street vendor, the peaceful slumber of a newborn baby. But each experience was intensely real, the sensations vivid and undeniable. He started to dread going to sleep, the uncertainty of where or who he would wake up is filling him with anxiety. His own life began to feel distant, a temporary anchor between these strange nightly excursions into other people's existences. He tried to find a pattern, a reason for these bizarre shifts. Was it random? Was there some connection between the lives he inhabited? He couldn't find any. The only constant was the return to his own body when he woke up in the morning. The experience was isolating. How could he explain this to anyone? They would think he was insane. He kept it a closely guarded secret, the weight of it adding to his growing unease. His days became a careful performance of normalcy, a mask to hide the nightly chaos that consumed his sleep. He found himself observing people more intently, wondering if any of them had ever experienced something similar, a fleeting trespass into another consciousness. The thought was both terrifying and a strange source of a desperate hope, that he wasn't truly alone in this bizarre predicament. One night, he woke up in a body that felt strangely familiar. He was in a small, cluttered room, the air thick with the smell of paint. His hands were his own, calloused and stained with color. He looked in the mirror. The face that stared back was his, but younger, maybe around 20. He was in his own past. He spent the night in a daze of bewildered recognition, exploring his old room, seeing objects he had long forgotten. The posters on the wall, the half-finished sketches on his desk, the worn-out guitar in the corner, they were all ghosts of a life he had lived. It was a strange, unsettling form of time travel, inhabiting his younger self, reliving a night he had no memory of. He tried to interact with his surroundings, to touch things, to see if he could alter anything, but it was as if he were a ghost himself, an unseen observer in his own past. When he woke up the next morning, he was back in his 32-year-old body. The experience had been jarring, a reminder of the linear progression of his own life in contrast to the chaotic jumps he was experiencing every night. It also planted a seed of a terrifying possibility. If he could inhabit his past, could he also inhabit a future he hadn't yet lived? The thought was both intriguing and deeply frightening. He was a witness, an observer, with no control over where he went or whose life he inhabited. The only constant was the return to himself with the morning light. He experienced the mundane routines of strangers, their joys and their sorrows, their triumphs and their failures. He felt the sting of a child's scraped knee, the quiet satisfaction of a gardener watching his plants bloom, the crushing loneliness of an elderly widow. Each night was a fleeting immersion into a different consciousness, a temporary shedding of his own identity. Then, one night, he woke up and didn't return. He stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, the rough plaster he remembered from the first time. He tried to will himself back to his own body, to the familiar comfort of his own bed, but nothing happened. Panic, colder and more absolute than ever before, seized him. He was trapped. The terror was compounded by a horrifying realization. This body, the body of the blonde woman, felt right. Not in a comfortable way, but in a way that suggested a deeper, more insidious connection. He spent the day in a state of frantic despair, the reality of his situation sinking in. He was stuck in the body of the blonde woman, with no idea how to get back to his own life. The terror of being permanently separated from himself was overwhelming. He tried to trigger the shift, focusing all his mental energy on returning to his own body as he fell asleep, but he simply woke up as her again. He tried to communicate, to explain his situation to the woman whose life he had invaded, but all that came out were her thoughts, her memories, her reactions. He was a silent passenger in her body, unable to control her actions or speak his own mind. It was a terrifying form of possession, a living nightmare where his own consciousness was trapped within another person's existence. Days turned into weeks. Elias, trapped in the blonde woman's life, was forced to live her days, experience her emotions, interact with her friends and family, all while his own consciousness remained trapped inside, a silent, screaming prisoner. The horror of his situation was absolute. He had lost himself, his own body, his own life, with no hope of return. The woman's name was Clara, he learned through her thoughts and interactions. She was a kind, artistic soul, and Elias was forced to experience her life as an unwilling intruder. He saw the world through her eyes, felt her joys and her anxieties, all the while his own identity felt like it was slowly fading, being overridden by hers. The line between his memories and hers began to blur, a terrifying merging of two separate consciousnesses. The fear of losing himself completely became a constant, gnawing dread. He tried to cling to his own memories, his own sense of self, but it was like trying to hold on to sand. He tried to leave clues, subtle actions that might indicate to Clara's friends and family that something was wrong, that the person they knew was no longer entirely there. But his attempts were clumsy, misinterpreted as moodiness or eccentricity. He was a ghost in her machine, unseen and unheard. The isolation was profound, a solitary confinement within the confines of another person's mind. The vibrant world around Clara felt distant and muted, filtered through the prison of her perceptions. He longed for the familiar weight of his own body, the sound of his own voice, the simple act of looking in the mirror and seeing himself. But those things felt like distant memories, fading remnants of a life that was slipping away. The terror of permanent displacement, of being lost forever within the labyrinth of another person's mind, became his constant companion. Have you ever had a recurring dream or a vivid experience that felt so real it blurred the lines between reality and imagination? What made it so unsettling or impactful?